Today is Wednesday. It's November the 3rd. The title of our devotional is Love Thinketh No Evil. Now, the scripture reading is Psalm 72 and Song of Solomon, chapter 1. Now, Psalm 72 probably was penned near the end of David's life, maybe in the last weeks, the last months of his life, and it is sent to, or titled to, a psalm for Solomon. Now, chapter 72 and verse 20 of the Psalms, the last verse ends with these words: "The prayers of David, the son of Jesse, are ended." And so this marks the end of the second book of the Psalms. Now, Psalm 72, I'm not going to go into much detail with it, other than to invite you to go to my website, www.heartofashepherd.org, and there you will find the full devotional for Psalm 72. It is David's prayer for his son, the King Solomon. Now, I want to draw your attention for the balance of this devotional to the Song of Solomon, chapter 1, and introduce this wonderful book. It is so unique, and you will find that as you read it. And so, the Song of Solomon, chapter 1, is the second portion, or the second half of today's scripture reading. Now, the Song of Solomon is a love story, a celebration of love between a man and a woman. Now, the book does have messianic implications. Somebody would say messianic overtones, meaning it is a prophecy and a portrayal of the millennial reign of Christ following his second coming. Now, throughout the book, you will find in the Song of Solomon, Solomon expressing his love in a young king's passion for a peasant woman, but also that peasant woman, a Shulamite, expressing her love for Solomon, whom she believes is a shepherd. Now, there are three possible interpretations of the Song of Solomon. Now, the first is allegorical, and that means it is a narrative that describes God's relationship with his people, Israel. Now, early church fathers even took Song of Solomon to be expression of Christ's love for the church. Now, there is then, number one, the allegorical interpretation of the Song of Solomon. Number two, there is what is called a typical interpretation, and it has been suggested that the Song of Solomon is a description of Christ's love and his relationship with the church. Now, then there is a third one. So we have allegorical, we have literal, but there is a third manner of interpretation, and that is what I'm going to describe as a literal interpretation of the Song of Solomon. Now, what do you mean, Pastor? I mean this, that the Song of Solomon is literally a narrative of a romance between Solomon and a young woman whom will be introduced as a peasant girl, a Shulamite. Now, and so it is a love story of the king who loved a woman and the woman who loved the king. Song of Solomon, chapter 1, now today's scripture reading, is the beginning of that courtship. Now, I'm going to follow with a literal interpretation and help you to understand that it is believed by some, and I think it is a great interpretation, that Solomon as the king had perhaps tired of his court and all the people of his offices, his administration. And it would seem, as some would say, that he had disguised himself as a lowly shepherd. And he had left the palace, traveled northward. Well, in his journey, he met a beautiful young woman. Now, in verse 6, she's described as one laboring in a vineyard her family had leased. And perhaps it was the vineyard of the king himself. Now, this young woman is identified in chapter 6 and verse 13 as a Shulamite. Now, she did not recognize Solomon, did not recognize her king, and she concluded that this man that had come to her disguised as a shepherd was of the same rank, roughly, in society as was she. Well, like many women who dream of love, she met this stranger, this shepherd, and was flattered and even embarrassed by the attention he had shown her. You'll see that in chapter 1, verses 2 through 4. Now, in verse 5 and 6, she is mindful and even embarrassed of what is described as her black skin. She says in verse 5, I am black, but beautiful, comely. Now, the idea of being black there is most likely by working in the sun, working in the vineyard, her skin had become very dark by the rays of the Middle Eastern sun. And so she summed up her appearance with humility, saying, I am black but comely, I'm beautiful. O ye daughters of Jerusalem, as the tents of Kedar. Now, Kedar would be Bedouin shepherds. As the curtains of Solomon, the beauty of the curtains that would hang in the temple or in the palace of Solomon. And then she goes on to say, in a sense of humility and embarrassment, look not upon me, because I am black, I am dark, I'm tan, because the sun hath looked upon me. And then she goes on and gives us a little bit of insight into her household. Again, in verse 6, she says, my mother's children. Now, she doesn't say my brother or my brothers. And that has led some, and I tend to agree, that her mother's children were actually her step family, perhaps her step brothers. And she says, and they were angry with me, and they made me the keeper of the vineyards, but mine own vineyard have I not kept. And so there we have the idea of the vineyard itself being leased out, and she being the laborer there. Now, verse 7, this Shulamite peasant woman, this young woman, dreamed of meeting the shepherd once again. And she wondered where his flocks, verse 7, might have grazed. Now, verses 9, reading really through verse 14, we could summarize it as saying romance was in the air. And she knew their interest, the interest that she had for the shepherd, and the shepherd had for her, whom she did not know was Solomon the king, but that he had affection for her. Her love for the shepherd is expressed in verses 9 through 14. Verse 16 and verse 17, like a young woman, she dreams of lying beside the shepherd on a bed of green grasses, and with a canopy, verse 17, of cedar and fir branches over her head. A young woman, she dreams of love. Now, allow me some closing thoughts. The first is this, that love is not blind. Though their stations in life were different, the king loved this tan-skinned woman who labored in the vineyard, and she loved him. But she believed that he was a lowly shepherd. She had no idea the love and the attention and the affection she was being shown was by the very king of Israel himself. And the king, on the other hand, ignored the traits that would have been undesirable, weathered skin and calloused hands from labor. Solomon loved her, and he focused on the positives of her beauty and her character. Somebody has said that beauty is only skin deep, but character goes down to the heart. And I think that's true in Song of Solomon chapter 1. Let me close with an application. Negative traits will inevitably become obvious in all of our relationships, in our friendships, in our courtship, in our marriage, and even in our church family. You will see negative things about others. But when those come to your knowledge, you have a choice to dwell on the negatives or love and look beyond them. After all, 1 Corinthians 13, verse 5, charity, or that is love, thinketh no evil. Choose to look on the positives in the lives of the people that you love, because that's what love does. God bless you, and bye-bye.